Anyway, a couple of things. After class last Wednesday, I learned that a symposium schedule was in my mailbox. So on Thursday, I scanned it with my scanner at home and placed it on iCollege. Most of you probably do not know about it, but there's a symposium now every Thursday, I believe at 7 o'clock, at a nearby Methodist church. One of you saw the notice and attended. Regrettably, I'd like to say it, during this class I didn't know about it. Anyway, for those of you who checked iCollege, I posted on iCollege on Wednesday afternoon. If you missed the first two, the first one was on the 15th, and I did not know about that one. The next one was on the 22nd, and I didn't find out about that one until after your class. But there is going to be about 5 or 6 more symposiums between now and March 5th. And the schedule ends March 5th. Whether they'll post a new schedule or not, I don't know. Anyway, the pass and test is Wednesday, and yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the thing right now. There's like a bunch of different ones that we can go to.
Yeah.
Can we go to just one and get all the credit, or do we
You have to go to, if you go to one, you get 2 points added, up to 10 points. You have to go to 5 to get 10 points added.
Okay, so you can't go.
You can pick and choose.
Okay.
Yeah, you go to one and get 2 points added to your final average, and believe me, in about 1/5 of the cases, that'll raise your grade by a letter. Get 4 points added, and almost half the cases, that'll raise this grade by a whole letter. So it does make a difference. And get 10 points added, that's certain to raise your grade by a letter. Except most of the students who attend them are A students anyway and don't need the points, but that's another issue. No, I don't mean, I don't want to discourage you from attending at all. They're really good. I would attend them myself, but I live so far away.
So we go.
I did attend 1 or 2 of them years back, yes.
We go and then we just like write an essay.
You can write an essay, or you can do like one of your classmates that's already done. Get a teacher to sign that you were there.
Okay.
Yeah. Or write a report. I'd prefer reading the report. That way it's like I get the gist of it without having been there. But if you can get a teacher who's there to sign, and they expect, because a lot of teachers are doing this around the college, or giving extra credit to students who attend, so the teacher in charge expects that you'll ask her to sign it to show that you were in fact there. So that way you save yourself from having to write a report. Again, all this is on the syllabus. There might be other symposiums located here on the campus, or even on a campus at Decatur, and if you don't want to go to Decatur, some of these things are posted online on streaming video, or they have been in the past. All right. Now, at the end of the class last time, there were 2 or 3 things I did not say about Egypt that I should have. But well, first of all, are there any questions? Okay, as far as I know, I left off the part about the Book of the Dead. Very important. The Egyptians believed that when they went into the next life, they were expected to stand before the gods and list 10 things, 10 vile deeds that they had not committed. In other words, I never removed my neighbor's landmark. Keep in mind, the Egyptians' land would flood every year, but the people would put landmarks of very, very heavy stones that would tend to stay in place, and then the landmarks separated their land from the neighbors. Well, in a surface that's very difficult to, that doesn't have any natural barriers, it would be easy for man to just kind of get his sons together and scoot his neighbor's landmark over a few feet in his favor against his neighbor. And it was a crime, but apparently it was something that went on a lot. They say, I never moved my neighbor's landmark. I never did this. I am no adulterer. I am no thief. I am no liar. 10 things, and a lot of these 10 are found in the Bible, similar to the 10 Commandments. They're not word for word the same, but a lot of them. And it leads people to wonder if Moses did not copy from the Book of the Dead when he wrote the 10 Commandments. Anyway, they were expected to state before the gods that they had not committed these 10 vile deeds. Ka is the Egyptian word that basically in English should be translated soul. Typically a ka was in the shape of a falcon. Again, the Egyptians had a real fascination for falcons. And the ka was a part of you that went into the next life. The Egyptians were so much for life after death that they would, particularly the richer people, would try to carry as many of their possessions with them as they could. They would put in with their bodies, they would mummify their bodies and put in their tombs some of their gold and silver and jewels and even some food to sustain them in the next life. Now, I don't believe I mentioned this woman, but her Hatshepsut was just about the only woman you find who was a pharaoh. She took over the way a lot of women have throughout history. They were the wife of a pharaoh, and she was the same thing, a wife of a pharaoh. Her husband died and left a son who was not old enough, so basically her son was officially the pharaoh, but she would run the government because he was not old enough, so she would run it as regent. But then sometimes they managed to conveniently put away their sons and rule themselves without their sons, and apparently Hatshepsut tried the same thing. When she died, her son though tried to obliterate her memory by throwing all of her references in the garbage heap, and we found a remarkably good statue of her in a garbage heap with a life-size and painted, with the paint still intact because in Egypt's dry climate, things preserve very well. And they tried to completely obliterate and erase her memory and act like she never had been a pharaoh. Again, this was the way Egyptians are known to have kept their history. Some pharaohs, it wasn't just her, but other pharaohs, their memory had been obliterated, and other pharaohs were added who ruled concurrently, but they were added to make it look like they ruled at different times, all of which was attempted to pad Egyptian history. All right. Three things, as far as I know, I did not mention to this class, but I want to mention now. Yes?
Can you explain once more the ka soul?
The ka, that was the part of you that lived on after your body died. The soul. In other words, that was what went into the next life. The Egyptians depicted the ka as a falcon with a bright light around it, or that would go into the next life, and they would recite these passages from the Book of the Dead, 10 things that they were to memorize in this life and carry with them to the next, and saying, I have not done this vile deed, I have not done that vile deed, hoping to make themselves worthy to enter a happy afterlife. All right, three things I need to pick up on Egyptian history that I left off. All right. Now, back to Israel. If you read this story of the Israelis being delivered from the land of Egypt, it might read like a fairy tale. And in fact, I talked to a Chinese man one time who said these stories in your Bible sound like our fairy tales. I want to remind you, folks, every ancient society begins its history with stories that today we call fairy tales. And either they were prone to exaggerate, I mean, you can believe what you want to, or there were some things going on back then that are not going on now, that we don't see happening now, but that they saw happening then. And that they wrote about. What you believe about them will depend on your worldview. But essentially, according to the Hebrew story, they went into the land of Egypt, and a man named Moses got them out. Now, according to their story, the Egyptian Pharaoh commanded that all male babies were to be killed because the Hebrews were multiplying so fast. And folks, this has been true throughout history. Your poorer people will have more children than your civilized people. And yes, this is very, very true in the modern world. Your poor people, even people we call uncivilized, are having many more babies than their more educated, more civilized folk. And eventually what happens is your uncivilized outnumber the civilized. Well, Pharaoh was fearful that the Israelis would eventually outnumber the Egyptians, so he made a law that all babies were to be killed, all male babies were to be killed. Moses was put in a basket and floated down the Nile River, and Pharaoh's daughter found him and brought him up and adopted him. Now this story, folk, is to be repeated 3 times in the ancient world. Sargon of Agag was put in a basket and floated down the Euphrates River where some shepherds found him. And Cyrus the Great, who we'll talk about before the day's out, same thing. He was put in a basket and floated down the Euphrates River. And again, some shepherds found him. In the case of Moses, though, he was found by Pharaoh's daughter, who brought him up in a palace. He was educated in the school of the Egyptians. And then he ran away from Pharaoh and spent 40 years tending the sheep, and then went back to Egypt and led the children of Israel out of Egypt. Among the slaves, particularly the slaves of the United States 150, 200 years ago, their favorite Bible character was Moses. And again, anyone can guess why. Moses was the great slave freer. And in fact, the slaves named one of their heroes Grandma Moses, because Grandma Moses had a knack for appearing in a slave camp in the middle of the night with a pistol in her hand, and when she appeared, every slave in the camp was going to go with her, whether they wanted to or not. And she would lead them to freedom. And Grandma Moses lived out her life, was never caught, never found by the southern slave owners who wanted to execute her for treason. Anyway, Moses was, among other things, a lawgiver. He wrote down the law that the children of Israel were to keep. The law defined morality, and you can find a lot of his laws among them in Egyptian laws and in the laws of Hammurabi. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. You knock a person's tooth out, your tooth should be knocked out also. You knock out a person's eye, your own eye had to be put out. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You find this in the law of Moses. You find it in the laws of Hammurabi, indicating that there might have been some things in common, that Moses had access to Hammurabi's code, or that Moses certainly had access to the Egyptian law codes. Anyway, the Israelis went into the land of Canaan, and they took over part of the land. They never conquered it all. They still had to contend with the Philistines who remained there, and the Phoenicians whom they could not destroy. The Phoenicians and Philistines were both very powerful peoples. But they conquered the land of Canaan and settled there. And folk, as justification for their conquest, they accused the Canaanites of practicing astrology, practicing all kinds of witchcraft. But among other of their practices, they would practice temple prostitution. In other words, the young women would prostitute themselves in honor of their gods. And any babies born from this prostitution, they would offer as a sacrifice to their god. And the Israelis said this practice was abominable, and they used this as justification for taking over and driving the Canaanites out. A lot of the Canaanites have been suspected of fleeing to Europe and settling in places like Spain and France. But whatever the case, the Israelis moved in, set up a nation. At first, they were ruled by judges. For some 300 years, just that they would pick the most able man in the kingdom, or the most able man in the country, and say, "You be our judge." When that judge died, they pick another judge. And the only law they had was the law of Moses, and the judges would decide disputes. Then they decided to have a king. The most famous of their kings was King David. King David started out as a shepherd, as was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And David is famous for having a fight with a giant named Goliath. Again, folk, I have to state, giant stories are found all over the ancient world. So it wasn't just that the Hebrews had stories about giants and the rest of the people. These stories you find in other writings, in Egyptian and Babylonian and Sumerian folklore, are more far out and more unbelievable by far than what you'll find in the Bible. We'll get to Greek mythology. Again, some of the Greek stories are far more far out. Nevertheless, David killed a giant who was about 9 feet tall, and he eventually went on to become king. And as king, he conquered a lot of the territory around him, conquered territory from the Gaza region all the way to the river Euphrates. Built up a big king. He had a son named Solomon, who also is known to be very wealthy and extremely wise. Then the kingdom split in two. The northern kingdom rebelled, and it split into the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Israel to the north and Judah to the south. For 300 years, these two kingdoms remained at odds with each other. Well, at times they were at peace, at times they were at war. Then the kingdom of Israel was carried captive by the Assyrians. And 100 years later, Judah was carried captive by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Now, the land of Israel, once it was carried captive, we never hear from it again. And people have wondered what happened to the lost tribes, what happened to Israel. I have my own theories, but that's not important right now. But they never did reassemble as a nation. As for Judah, eventually Judah assembled under the Persian king Cyrus. They were only in captivity for about 50 or so years. Then Cyrus the Great allowed them to return. Now, at this point, we take leave from them as far as the ancient part of their history is concerned. They went on to be conquered by the Romans, as was everybody else. They rebelled against the Romans. They were scattered throughout the world and remained scattered for almost 2,000 years until, well, actually for 1,900 years, until about 1948. In 1948, they reassembled as a nation, and they're still there today. All right. That's a brief summary of their history. Again, I could spend the entire semester talking about them, but this is a world history class, not just a class on now. Anyway, your book even questions whether there was a united kingdom in Israel. And folk, I will say this, I guess I've read 100 different history books in my lifetime that deal with this topic, and no two of them are alike when it comes to studying about the Jews and Judaism. It seems like they have to poke somewhere where that they disagree with a biblical account, and every one of them has a different type of disagreement. I read recently that it's believed that Abraham did not even exist. There have been persons who said that Moses could not have written down the law because writing had not been invented at that time. Then we found out, hey, writing had been invented long, long before Moses' day. They questioned who was a pharaoh of the Exodus, and there were about 3 or 4 good candidates. You're looking for a pharaoh whose oldest son died. And then they say that the plagues do not exist, the plagues that are told about in the Bible. Here's the problem with that. Egyptian chronology is known to be distorted. I won't write this down, I won't go to it, but the Tel El Amarna letters describe at least 6 of the 10 plagues. One problem, the Tel El Amarna letters are dated some 500 or 600 years before the biblical account of the Exodus. But again, if you ignore the way Egyptians kept their history, and place these letters, having been written at the time of the plagues, 6 of the 10 plagues at least show up in the letters. Did any of you happen to see the movie Exodus that came out recently? One person in my other class did. But they deal with the writer. I mean, the maker of the movie dealt with this topic. Anyway, different authors would make a different poke at trying to discredit or undo something that is said in the biblical account. But up until now, eventually the biblical account has been exonerated time and time again, until in the last 75 years, the Bible has been looked on as being a reliable source for ancient history. You might wonder, how can it be reliable? Well, when you compare it again with other sources we have for the period, it has far less mythology than the Babylonians, the Sumerians, the Assyrians, the Greeks, and the Romans had. Stories that maybe seem far-fetched but are far more believable than the stories of these others. And it's known that the ancients deliberately distorted their history. So the Bible is as accurate and reliable as any other book at the time, and possibly even more so. All right, now their biggest contribution was their belief in monotheism. The people of that time tended to believe that nature itself was God. The sun was God, the planets were God, the river was God, everything in nature was God. And this meant that they would not dare exploit nature when they had to kill an animal to eat it, and or when they had to cut down a tree to chop it up either for firewood. They perform a ceremony called an apology. They would apologize to the tree, explaining, in effect, we have to cut you down even though we hate to, but it's necessary. Again, all this was designed to appease the anger of the gods, who might otherwise be angry with them for chopping down a tree. It gave them a closeness to nature, an affinity with nature. And yes, I had a graduate professor at UT, Dr. Bing by name, who said maybe we in the modern world are missing something because they were closer to nature than we are. But it gave them and it also meant that they would not exploit nature. They were careful to not chop down too many trees, to not clear away too much land, and really careful about the use of natural resources. That almost reminds you of the modern green movement. They didn't seem to have a problem with air pollution, water pollution, maybe because they didn't have enough population, but also they didn't have they had a belief that nature was itself God. Well, along came the Hebrews, and they said, no, nature is not God. And in fact, God does not even live in nature. That God created nature, yes, but He transcends nature. He maintains a separate existence from nature. And you might not can appreciate how important this belief was. But folk, I personally think that without the monotheism that the Jewish people gave us, we would not have the modern technological world that we do have. Without it, there would not be the belief in the regularity and order in the universe, which is essential if we're to make devices like cell phones, automobiles. I mean, we believe if you put together two automobiles alike, they're going to perform alike. They're going to behave alike. They'll both work. And they work because of natural laws. And if you go out whenever your class is over and try to start your car and it won't start, it is highly unlikely any of you will offer a sacrifice to try to appease the God of the car to get the car running again. But this is a way that our distant ancestors would have acted if one of their mystical devices stopped working. They would have looked on their cars as being mystical devices, not mechanical devices. I mean, yeah, this remote controller here, they would think of as being a mystical device. Your cell phone, they would think of as being a magical device. And if your cell phone quits, again, none of you are likely to go perform some kind of a ceremony, some ritual to get the spirit of a cell phone revived again. But this was a way that the people at that time behaved. And needless to say, folks, they did not make anything that we would call significant technological progress. They did not believe that the universe had enough regularity and order about it. Now, folks, there are still some things about our universe that are a little bit irregular and disorderly. Weather forecasting. When I was a kid, they told us the weatherman is right when forecasting tomorrow's weather 6 times out of 7. But you'll be more right if we could just get some satellites in orbit and make better computers. So today we've spent billions of dollars on weather satellites. We've spent millions of dollars on computers. And a weatherman can only forecast tomorrow's weather 6 times right out of 7. Weather forecasting is not much more accurate than it was when I was a kid. Oh, but we have the devices. Yes, but the weather seems at times to do what it wants to do without regard to our science. And you know what I'm talking about. We have the science on it. Hey, I'm not saying weather forecasting isn't science. It's just simply not an accurate science. And we don't always know why. There are forces at work that we still have not figured out. Now, maybe someday we'll get better at it. But again, the ancients noticed the weather and thought that this is the way God behaves. He, the weather, the storm, has a mind of his own, and he does what he pleases. That is the weather god. Whether it be Thor or Enki, god of storms, Jupiter, god of lightning, Zeus, again, god of lightning. He has a mind of his own, and he will do what he wants to, just like they would believe that their automobiles, any mystical device, would have a mind of his own, and he does what he wants to do. Basically, just simply tell your automobile, hey, you go wherever you want to go. You're in charge anyway. In the old days, folk, the horses, you could do that. You get in a horse and essentially just let the horse run, and he'd run you back home without you guiding. He knows the way. I mean, the old Christmas song, the horse knows the way to carry the sleigh through the white and drifting snow. And someday we're going to have cars, and all you do is dial where you want to go, and your car will take you there. That's coming on us pretty fast, by the way. When I was 9 years old, we had a 4th grade teacher who talked about that. And she believed it was becoming faster than it has. Well, 50 years have gone by. We almost have that technology now. Again, all these devices we have would not be possible, I don't think, without a belief that there's a certain amount of regularity and order, at least in some parts of the universe. Some things. And some things we still can't predict. Like, I have no idea what kind of scores you'll make on your test Wednesday. But I do know this. The fact that most of you have been in the same class, heard the same teacher, does not mean you're going to make the same grade. Of course, you had different backgrounds coming in here in the first place, and some of you might prepare harder than others. All right. Monotheism was copied later by Christianity and influenced Islam that was to come even later. There was a connection here between religion and morality that you did not have in the ancient world up to that time. Now, I've read many an article by atheistic writers who say that we don't want religion, but we do want morality, and they're upset that morality was hijacked by religion. And they're saying, hey, we can have a moral standard without religion. Well, the Hebrews said without God, there's no basis for a moral standard. And everybody can decide his own moral standard. So if somebody decides, hey, because I'm poor, I have a right to steal the food I need, so he'll go out and do it. I mean, a lot of people are, because this man is known to be crooked, I have a right to steal from him, so we'll go out and proceed to do it. Again, if each person makes his own morality, who's to say what's right or wrong? But the Hebrews said, well, morality is based on a standard that was set by God, therefore it is applicable to everybody. And that wrong would be punished. Again, this belief has been incorporated by Christians and Islam who came later. All right.